They weren't just fearless warriors from the north, they were clever problem solvers who turned daily survival into innovation. The Vikings found smart ways to conquer every challenge nature threw at them. The Firestarter's secret. Picture a Viking standing on a frozen shoreline. The sky is gray, the wind howls, and the rain hasn't stopped in days. Everything is soaked, yet he kneels calmly, striking a small piece of metal against a stone. Within moments, a tiny ember glows, and before long, a flame dances in the cold. This wasn't magic. It was skill, passed down through generations. The Vikings used a natural material called tinder fungus, which grew on birch trees. When dried and prepared, it turned into a soft, felt-like material called amadou. Unlike regular wood, amadou could catch even the weakest spark and smolder for minutes, long enough to start a fire. They carried small pouches filled with it, along with flint and steel, so no matter where they traveled, across snow-covered mountains or stormy seas, they could always make fire. To protect the ember from wind, they wrapped it inside dry moss or straw, gently blowing until it came alive. Archaeologists have found charred fungus in Viking campsites and ships, proof that this technique was part of everyday life. Even modern survivalists still use this same fungus to start fires, and it works just as perfectly as it did 1,000 years ago. Imagine trying to light a fire in the rain with nothing but natural tools. That's the level of mastery the Vikings had. It wasn't just about warmth, it was about control over the harshest elements of nature. Preserving meat with smoke and honey. When the long northern winters turned the land to ice and the seas to stone, the Vikings had to rely on food they'd prepared months in advance. Their genius lay in how they transformed simple ingredients into long-lasting provisions without a single tool of modern preservation. Imagine a wooden hut at the edge of a fjord, smoke curling through a hole in the roof. Inside, rows of fish and slabs of meat hang from wooden beams above a slow fire of birch and oak. The air is thick, salty, and sweet. Over time, the smoke hardens the outer surface of the meat, sealing it from moisture and bacteria. The Vikings learned that the compounds in smoke didn't just flavor their food, they protected it. But the real innovation came with honey. For prize cuts, they coated the surface with a thick layer of honey, creating a natural barrier that kept out air and bacteria. The sugar acted as a preservative, while the honey's acidity prevented spoilage. Sometimes they even mixed salt and honey together, making a powerful blend that kept food fresh for entire voyages. Archaeologists have found remains of these smoked meats and traces of honey in Viking storage pits in Greenland, proof that these methods worked even in freezing climates. Sailors carried barrels of smoked fish, cured pork, and dried bread across oceans, the fuel that powered their explorations. Today, when we enjoy smoked salmon or beef jerky, we're tasting a method that began in Viking smokehouses. Their survival depended on these quiet, clever techniques. Every smoky bite was a reminder that in the frozen north, knowledge, not luck, kept you alive. Finding the sun with a crystal. Imagine being lost at sea, no compass, no stars, and clouds covering the sky. The waves crash endlessly, and every direction looks the same. Yet somehow the Vikings always knew where they were going. Their secret lay in a small, clear crystal that could see the sun, even when it was invisible. This crystal, known as Iceland spar or the Viking sunstone, had a unique property. It could polarize light, meaning it could detect the hidden direction of the sun through fog, clouds, or even after sunset's glow. A skilled navigator would hold the crystal to the sky, rotate it slowly, and watch how the light split inside. When the brightness balanced evenly on both sides, it revealed the sun's true position. That tiny piece of information told them exactly which direction to sail. It sounds almost like magic, but scientists have tested the method and proven it works. In 2013, researchers from Hungary used Iceland spar to locate the sun with 92% accuracy under full cloud cover, exactly what Viking sagas described centuries ago. Combined with wooden sun compasses and sharp observation of birds, waves, and wind, this crystal helped Vikings cross the open North Atlantic long before compasses reached Europe. It was small enough to fit in a pocket, yet powerful enough to guide entire fleets. The Viking Sunstone remains one of history's most fascinating examples of human intuition meeting natural science. Even without modern instruments, they understood how to read the world around them. When you think about it, every GPS today is a high-tech echo of that same ancient spark of genius, a stone that once guided the bravest sailors through the unknown. Waterproofing clothes with fish oil. The North was never kind to travelers. Rain poured sideways, snow fell without warning, and icy winds sliced through even the thickest cloaks. Yet somehow, the Vikings could row across open seas and work in freezing storms without freezing to death. Their secret wasn't armor or fur, it was chemistry. The Vikings made their own waterproof gear using fish oil and animal fat, turning natural waste into weatherproof protection. After a day's catch, fishermen would save the oil from cod and herring instead of throwing it away. They warmed it gently over a fire until it thickened into a soft, waxy liquid. Then, using cloth or bare hands, they rubbed it deep into their wool and leather clothing. The oil soaked through the fibers, forming a flexible barrier that repelled water while keeping the fabric breathable. It didn't make the clothes shiny or heavy, just incredibly resistant to rain and sea spray. Leather boots, gloves, and sails were treated the same way. Before long journeys, ship crews worked together, coating everything that could absorb water. The smell of fish oil filled the air, but that oily scent meant survival. Even after days at sea, their cloaks stayed dry inside, and their boots kept their feet warm. In a world ruled by storms and salt water, they didn't fight nature, they adapted to it. Turf roof homes that stayed warm all year. In the frozen lands of the North, warmth wasn't comfort, it was survival. The Vikings, living through long, brutal winters, found a way to build homes that stayed warm without burning endless firewood. Their answer was genius in its simplicity: turf roof houses, living shelters made from the earth itself. These homes began with strong wooden frames cut from pine or birch. Instead of covering the walls with stone, the Vikings layered them with blocks of soil and grass, roots and all. Each layer was pressed tightly, forming thick, natural insulation that trapped heat during winter and stayed cool in summer. Over time, the grass kept growing on top, turning the roof into a living blanket. From a distance, these homes blended seamlessly into the hillsides, warm, windproof, and almost invisible to enemies. Inside, the layout was practical and efficient. A single central hearth provided both heat and light, while animal hides covered doorways to block drafts. Smoke from the fire escaped through a small hole in the roof, which also doubled as a natural skylight. Even when snow piled up outside, the temperature inside remained surprisingly steady. Farmers, families, and even chieftains used this same design. Archaeological excavations in Iceland and Greenland have revealed turf homes that still stand after 1,000 years. Their walls intact, their structure solid. The method was so effective that people in rural Iceland continued building turf houses into the 20th century. Modern architects studying eco-friendly homes now draw inspiration from these ancient designs. The Vikings didn't just build for the moment, they built for endurance. In their world, every wall, every roof, and every fire was part of a living system designed by necessity and perfected by wisdom. Treating wounds with honey and yarrow. For the Vikings, battle was a constant part of life, and so were wounds. Axes, arrows, and freezing winters meant that infection could kill faster than a blade. But instead of surrendering to sickness, they turned to nature for medicine. Their remedies weren't random guesses. They were the result of generations of observation and experimentation, and modern science now proves just how advanced they were. When a warrior returned injured, healers would gather in the firelight, carrying small wooden bowls filled with herbs, resins, and honey. First, they cleaned the wound using warm water mixed with crushed yarrow leaves, a plant known for its remarkable ability to stop bleeding. Yarrow constricted blood vessels, helping the wound to close while reducing swelling. Once the bleeding stopped, they applied a layer of pure honey, sealing the wound completely. Honey wasn't just soothing, it was antibacterial. Its natural enzymes created an environment where bacteria couldn't survive, preventing infections long before antibiotics existed. They didn't stop there. Birch bark was used to ease pain, willow leaves to lower fever, and garlic paste to fight infection. Archaeologists have discovered traces of these plants in ancient Viking settlements, confirming that this knowledge was widespread, not limited to healers or shamans. What's even more fascinating is that modern hospitals still use honey-based dressings and yarrow extracts for wound care. The Vikings didn't rely on magic, they relied on understanding. They knew that the earth around them could both hurt and heal. Layered winter clothing. In the Viking world, winter was not a season, it was a test. Icy winds from the Arctic tore through open fields, and blizzards could bury entire villages for weeks. To survive, the Vikings didn't just wear thick fur and hope for the best. They engineered their clothing the same way a shipbuilder designed a longboat, layer by layer, with purpose and precision. Closest to the skin, they wore a soft linen tunic. It absorbed sweat and kept the body dry, preventing cold from settling in. Over that came tightly woven wool garments that trapped warm air close to the skin, the perfect insulator. Finally, they added an outer layer made from animal hides or fur, often treated with fish oil to repel water. Each layer had its role, one to manage moisture, one to hold heat, and one to block wind and rain. Their boots were made from overlapping layers of leather, stuffed with dry moss or wool for insulation. Gloves were stitched from felted wool, and cloaks were secured with bronze brooches that doubled as ventilation control, open during work, closed during storms. Everything was practical, balanced, and built for endurance. This system worked so well that modern winter explorers still use the same layering principle, now recreated with synthetic fabrics and thermal technology. To the Vikings, clothing wasn't fashion, it was survival strategy. Every fiber was chosen with intent, every layer a line of defense against the cold. The pine tar trick for sealing ships. Every Viking voyage began with the sound of axes striking pine and the smell of smoke in the air. Their longships, sleek, strong, and built for both speed and survival, were the lifeline of their civilization. But wood and seawater don't mix easily. Salt, wind, and waves could destroy a ship in months if left unprotected. So the Vikings developed one of the most effective natural sealants ever created, pine tar. They made it by slowly burning pine wood in covered pits with very little oxygen. As the wood smoldered, thick resin dripped out, collected in containers below the ground. This dark, sticky tar became the Vikings' secret weapon against the sea. They brushed it along the hull of every ship, sealing every seam and pore in the wood. Once the tar hardened, it created a waterproof, flexible layer that protected the ship from rot, moisture, and salt damage. Before each journey, entire crews worked together, coating the hulls and ropes until everything gleamed with a black sheen. The scent of pine tar became so common that it was said you could recognize a Viking harbor before you even saw it, just by smell. Modern boat builders in Scandinavia still use pine tar made the same way, slow-burning pine in sealed pits, because nothing synthetic has ever worked better. That mindset is what allowed them to conquer oceans and reach worlds no one else dared to sail. Natural soap and weekly bathing routine. Natural soap and weekly bathing routine. In most of medieval Europe, bathing was rare and often frowned upon. But for the Vikings, cleanliness was part of daily life, a mark of pride and discipline. Far from being the dirty barbarians of legend, they were actually among the cleanest people of their time. Every Saturday, known as Laugardager, washing day, Viking families gathered near rivers, hot springs, or wooden tubs filled with heated water. There, they scrubbed away the week's dirt using a unique soap they made themselves. This soap, called lager, was a mix of animal fat and wood ash. When boiled together, it created a strong alkaline solution that cleaned the skin, killed bacteria, and even lightened hair color slightly, something many Vikings considered attractive. They didn't stop at bathing. Combs, tweezers, razors, and ear picks were found in almost every Viking grave. Men kept their beards trimmed, women braided their hair neatly, and both wore clean, well-maintained clothes. Foreign visitors often wrote with surprise about how bright and clean the Norse looked compared to others. They also burned aromatic herbs like juniper and thyme inside homes to keep air fresh and insects away. In cold months, when outdoor bathing wasn't possible, they wiped their bodies with warm, scented cloths, a kind of ancient sponge bath. To the Vikings, it wasn't just about looking good, it was about showing respect for themselves, their gods, and the world they lived in. Reforging metal. To the Vikings, iron was as valuable as gold. Every blade, axe, and tool came from metal that was hard to find and even harder to make. Mining was dangerous, furnaces demanded enormous heat, and a single sword could take days to forge. So when something broke, they didn't waste it, they rebirthed it. The Vikings mastered the art of reforging, turning old or broken weapons into tools, and worn tools back into new weapons. Inside smoky forges, blacksmiths, known as smeder, worked like alchemists. Using charcoal fires and bellows, they melted fragments of damaged swords and hammers, folding and hammering the glowing metal into new shapes. This process didn't just recycle iron, it made it stronger. Each time the metal was folded, tiny impurities burned away, creating layers that resisted cracks and stayed sharp longer. A sword that had seen battle could become a plowshare for farming. A broken spearhead might be reforged into a knife for carving wood. Nothing went unused. The Vikings even reused foreign weapons taken in raids, melting them down to forge their own designs. Archaeologists have found countless Viking blades with mixed metal origins. If you enjoyed discovering how Viking brilliance still shapes our lives today, make sure to subscribe.